Right. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. It's great to be back after 20 years. That was my first visit to Sydney, Melbourne, back in 2003 with a kind of invitation from the Australian government then. And I remember that when I returned home to Egypt, I had a few gifts to my 5-year-old daughter then, who insisted on some gifts with koala and kangaroos, insisting to have one of them. Of course, the climate in Egypt and the regulations to get them out from Australia to Egypt were not really helpful. So T-shirts of koala and kangaroos helped me just to survive my nagging daughter. But more gifts were about ideas. And the idea then, as I was mentioning to the Honorable Minister yesterday, it was an idea related to financial sector development and innovation based on a very famous report then in Australia, the Wallace Report, that didn't benefit Australia alone, but many countries through good partnerships, technical cooperation, and sharing ideas. And the other gift was how to establish market institutions, the Consumer Protection Agency and the Competition Authority of Egypt, which were basically under design then benefited a great deal from many of the ideas that were very well established then in Australia. This time is not different when it comes to exposure to great ideas. I attended the sessions. I had the pleasure of many bilaterals and issues related to technology, investment, research and development, innovation have been really emphasized, and adequately so, to provide solutions to decarbonization, to deal with the challenges of mitigation, to help us putting ourselves back on track to achieve the climate targets. At hosting a COP and events related to climate in a developing economy is very different from hosting it in an advanced OECD economy. And good luck to Australia with the bid to host a next COP in the future. But I think the questions that are raised for a developing country to host 30,000 people in times of economic difficulties globally, to have many answers. How to put climate action measures as part of the solution. When you are facing energy crisis, when you are facing food security challenges, when we have unprecedented for quite some time, I would say, debt challenges for developing economies and emerging markets, can climate action be part of the solution? Can I go comfortably to fellow Egyptians in their villages and their districts, telling them that hosting such summit is bringing not just solution to the long term, but it should be, if articulated better, can provide solutions to the immediate challenges we are facing. And this is basically the main problem that we are trying to solve in bringing the COP to the summit in Egypt. I think three things would help us dealing with that. First is to try to abandon the siloed approach to climate action, which had been suffering for many, many years of a reductionist approach, for sustainability to mean only mitigation, and mitigation to mean only having a kind of a price on carbon. I'm not undermining or belittling the importance of having a price attached to carbon, but that needs really to be put within a holistic approach. That really requires a lot of efforts when it comes to investments in the alternatives, and the great news coming from the experts, many of them were in the sessions yesterday and today, telling us that we have the technology, we have the means of implementing what we're after, that the cost of technology when it comes to renewables, be them solar or wind, have coming really by 95% compared to their levels back 10 years ago. So it's the issue here, the affordability of technology there with us, so we need to have something else which is basic about finance and investment. That gets me into the second thing related to that holistic approach when we talk about what is really missing. Yes, this forum is about energy, but adaptation shouldn't be forgotten. When adaptation had been forgotten for many years because of a generous assumption that we are going to be doing fantastically well in mitigation, so nobody should worry about adaptation. But we are facing severe problems when it comes to adaptation. This very great country, Australia, had more than a fair share of that in extreme weather events. And I think it's not just the scientists, but the general public have seen that themselves and reflected this issue in their recent votes for the new government. And it's all the best of luck in implementing and meeting the expectations of the people and their trust in you in that. But adaptation, when you go to Asia, to Africa, to many emerging markets, is requiring lots of funds. I was speaking to a minister from one of the small islands who was telling me, if I'm responding to every line minister related to agriculture or infrastructure or local community development, that will exhaust more than 60% of my budget if I am to respond to the adaptation needs. So where is the money going to be coming from? That requires that comprehensive and holistic approach. And for it, given that the business community, many of them are here, have really telling us, give us the way, give us the trust, de-risk where de-risking is needed, do the partnership where partnership are required. This will free resources for adaptation. So we don't need to crowd out the business sector from mitigation because they have the technology, they have the risk-taking capacity, and they can really provide solutions. And then where the business case is not really as obvious, which is on the adaptation front, we can really free more public finance domestically and from external resources for the adaptation requirements. There is a third file, very controversial. If you are going to be attending the COP, as it was in Glasgow, it will be more in Egypt, the file related to loss and damage. This is not settled. There are many countries already demanding better addressing of that. If you happen to be in Bonn or Copenhagen during the last few weeks, in Stockholm, the issue of loss and damage was very much there, and that needs really, again, finance and investments and insurance for the future as well. So this is the first part, breaking the silos, having a holistic approach. The second part is from summits to solutions. I think the previous summits and COPs had exhausted the English dictionaries of words of love and affection to the planet, putting many of the great words of how they are going. The companies and governments have been telling us how good they will be in their NDC, they are going to be ambitious, and pledges of cutting all of the emissions and all of that. This is the time, really. By COP27, countries are expected to have updated NDCs, and there is a committee led by former Minister of Climate and Environment of Canada, Minister McKenna, who's going to be sharing with us, I hope that she will be able to do that by the time of the COP, updates on standards, codes, and how to know better what is required from us to understand the pledges and how they are reflected in reality, and how to minimize the problems related to greenwashing. And the third and final point is basically how to get ourselves from assets into flows of funds. Many of you were in Glasgow or virtually connected to Glasgow. I know that official delegations were not able to travel, and many of the Australians were not in Glasgow, but definitely you are aware of what happened there, and many of your companies and financial institutions are part of the alliances, including the Glasgow Finance Alliance, the GFANZ, which have committed more than $130 trillion then to actions and investments and finance for the net zero. Here, it's easy to commit an asset, but how to transfer the asset into flows of funds and investments require lot of issues. One area that we'll get mainly from investment bankers, that we know our business, but we need a bit of de-risking. And we need multilateral development banks to help us on de-risking, on taking the first loss. That brings us to the famous $100 billion that had been promised back in Copenhagen. Last year, we were told that the figure reached roughly 79%. Oxfam would challenge that, would say, oh no, it's not really 79%, it's less than 20%. That gets us back into the issue of metric, how you are measuring these flows of funds. Anyways, let's assume, for argument's sake, that the figures shared by OECD from Canada and Germany were right, that we are close to 80%. We need then to reach the 100%. And even if we reach the 100 billion, which is the 100% of the 100 that I was talking about, if you multiply that by a factor of 10 to reach a trillion, that will not cover half of what is required for energy transition for developing economies and emerging markets alone. So here, the 100 billion, why I'm insisting on them? First, because it's an issue of token of trust. I will not trust you tomorrow unless you deliver something that is, I would say today it's symbolic, that 100 billion. So this is very much important. Second, for small island and low-income countries, that 100 billion is very important for them because this is a major source of funding for these countries. And third, for middle-income countries and other countries as well, the money could be used, the 100 billion, for leveraging, for first loss, so that will really help in enhancing the opportunities for the business sector and the financial sector to do their miracles. The other thing then, on that block on finance, is basically how to get more investments. We don't need more debts, really. If you read the recent reports coming from the World Bank and the IMF, they would tell you that emerging markets and developing economies are now at the peak of a debt challenge. This is the fourth wave of debt. And we know the three previous debt, the waves, each one of them, these debt waves ended with a crisis. Latin American crisis in the 1970s, in the emerging market crisis of 1990s, and of course, the global financial crisis. Each time we reach such high debts, we end up with a crisis. I hope this time is going to be different, although that the news coming from Sri Lanka, from Chad, from Zambia, and Ethiopia are not very much welcoming. So we need more investment. So actually, I'm very careful these days. I'm saying bankable projects should be replaced by investable projects. They may mean the same for some, but basically it's investment and partnerships that we would require. The third part, which could be really, as I was sharing with many colleagues, that could be a winner in COP27. If we manage to have some of the financial innovation, and I appreciate that there are many bankers in the room, of debt reduction mechanisms through swaps. Reduce the debt and invest in nature and invest in climate-related activities. This is not really new. Costa Rica have done it in the 1980s. Belize and Seychelles have done them recently. But now we are up to something new, which is basically not just projects. Relate them to NDCs and KPIs. So in this case, you will have bigger scale, and I've heard in the last session concerns about high transaction costs. If you relate the activities of debt reductions to KPIs and NDCs based on the country's choice and their contributions, that will have us with better scale. This is something for the consideration of Australia, which is a net creditor to many of the small islands and many countries in its neighborhood, to have that as an area of possible consideration. And again, the World Bank, IMF, and IMF in particular, is very keen to really see some sort of solutions in that area. Not talking on their behalf today, despite the membership of the board, but basically as a climate champion. Actually, climate champion is a very embarrassing title, but we went beyond that through the very careful moderator and master of ceremony today. One should be more humble than just introducing himself. What are you doing? I'm the climate champion. So I'm just the coordinator of the non-state activities. That gets me into a fourth point on finance. Carbon and carbon markets need to be created. Europe is very advanced. The United States had its own experiments. This part of the world had many good examples, but many developing economies, including mine, are trying to establish their carbon markets as well. And that will really provide, especially for those who are investors in the energy front, great opportunities. But we don't need to reinvent wheels. We need to adapt the new carbon markets to the requirements and needs for developing economies. And this could be a great area for partnership with Australia and the innovators here. The fifth point, I borrowed from the AFC, which is the African Finance Corporation. They call it Finnovation. Lots of new instruments linking them to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and ESG. That would be required to be more of the mainstream way of funding, and there have been a great deal of green, blue bonds and instruments, but again, we need to link them with more equity-based solutions rather than just debt. And the very, very final point. I don't like to quote heads of state and prime ministers and ministers, but I think one of the relevant quotes to our discussion today is basically coming from the American president, Mr. Biden, when he said, if I want to know your priorities, I would have a look to your budget. And it's really empty talk unless the budget of the state and the budget of municipalities and local communities and national and federal governments are not really reflecting what the officials are saying. And I hope that one day, actually Australia could be among the first, but because so far we don't have one country that has its own budget based on sustainability, based on the Sustainable Development Goals, based on climate action. So, of course, there are many items of spending related to that, but the budget itself is not based on the Sustainable Development Goals, and the climate action. They are not really based on how we are enhancing investment in education, on health, in human capital, on investments in infrastructure based on the 2030 agenda, investments in resilience of the economy and society, and that is basically public finance. If you have that, you will be sending adequate signals to the business sector and the private sector that you really mean business, and you create the partnership and prevent any kind of crowding out, and have some sort of accountability mechanism through the budget. Having said that, these are all the different lines, not the official line, but basically my reading on what is going to be discussed from now until COP27, including a variety of regional events and activities on the road to COP27. I know that many of you were eager to participate in COP26 in Glasgow. The opportunity is there, with your great opportunities to be in Sharm el-Sheikh, and next year is going to be in my region again in the United Arab Emirates. So that would be a good way to reflect your priorities, and I think I'm finished just in time with the Honorable Minister of Japan is with us, but I'll not take the great lines from our Master Ceremony. Thank you so much, and great to be here back in Australia. All the best.